Have you ever felt like your silence was more powerful than any speech you could give? That walking away without a word shook the ground more than slamming a door? Here's a truth most people won't say out loud, especially those who hurt you: your detachment, your peace, your refusal to chase, is tearing them apart. But they'll never admit it. They'll pretend. They'll move like nothing happened. But behind the scenes, they're unraveling. Why? Because Stoic relationships flip the script. They don't run on drama or desperation. They run on clarity, control, and composure. Here's the problem. Most people have been taught that silence is weakness. That if you don't fight for someone, you must not care. That if you walk away quietly, it's because you lost. But what if that's completely wrong? What if everything you were taught about breakups, closure, and communication was backward? That's the misconception keeping so many stuck in toxic loops. Fighting for people who already walked away, explaining their worth to those who disrespected it, waiting for apologies that will never come. If you've ever been in that space, spinning, second-guessing, stuck, this message is for you. Because there's a different path. One that doesn't chase validation. One that doesn't seek revenge. One that doesn't scream, "Look at me!" It simply says, "Watch me." Stoicism isn't just an ancient philosophy, it's a way forward. It's emotional self-mastery in the middle of chaos. And in Stoic relationships, your silence is not absence. It's presence in its most disciplined form. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't react, doesn't perform. And ironically, that's exactly what makes it unforgettable. So why does your silence hurt them more than any argument ever could? Why does your emotional distance echo louder than words? Why do they scroll through your social media in the dark, hoping for signs you still care, yet never reach out? What's the hidden truth behind all this quiet? And why do they feel so powerless now that you're no longer trying to prove anything? We're about to dive deep into that. Into the real reason they're spiraling. Into the shift you made that broke the emotional contract. Into the power of stillness, and how it's not just changing you, it's confronting them. This isn't a revenge arc. This is your rebirth. Your elevation. Your quiet evolution into someone unshakable. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand exactly why they're haunted, even if they'll never admit it. Don't go anywhere. The best part is just getting started. 1. The void they didn't expect. They thought you'd stay stuck. They really did. Maybe not in those words exactly, but deep down, that was the assumption. When they walked away, cold, distant, indifferent, they believed the silence afterward would be theirs to enjoy, a clean slate for their freedom. But here's the thing no one tells them: when you leave behind someone grounded in stoicism, someone not playing emotional ping-pong, the silence doesn't follow you. It follows them. You weren't loud when they left. You didn't slam the door, beg, or flood their inbox. You just disappeared. And it's that very stillness, that complete removal of your energy, that begins to haunt them. Because now they're left with something they didn't prepare for: the void. It's easy to assume the one who doesn't say anything is suffering the most. That's what most people think. If he's not posting sad quotes or checking her story, he must be broken behind the scenes, right? Wrong. In Stoic relationships, silence isn't a void of emotion. It's a declaration of discipline. And it's that discipline they never accounted for. You see, they thought this was going to be just like before. That you'd reach out eventually. That you'd send one last "I miss you." That you'd leave a window cracked open just in case they changed their mind. But instead, you gave them nothing to come back to. And that silence, that absence, it became louder with every day that passed. Ask yourself this: what hurts more, someone arguing with you, or someone who doesn't care enough to respond? Exactly. They didn't expect to be ignored. They expected to be chased. Because in their mind, your role was always to orbit them. Their texts, their moods, their validation. But now they scroll and see nothing. No updates. No hints. No emotional breadcrumbs for them to analyze or respond to. And while they might act unbothered, the truth is, they're confused. That confusion breeds frustration, and frustration turns into obsession. They start replaying everything in their head, not out of love, but out of ego. Why isn't he reacting? Did he move on already? Was I never that important? You've become a question mark in their mind. And human beings hate question marks. We want certainty, control, predictability. But you remove that comfort. Your silence has turned into a mystery they can't solve, and that drives them insane. You see, when you go silent without anger, when you remove yourself with calm, unshaken confidence, it doesn't read as defeat. It reads as strength. And people don't panic when they lose access to your affection. They panic when they realize they never actually had control over it in the first place. This is the paradox that eats away at them. They used to think they knew how much you cared. Now they question if you ever did. And that's not something they'll say out loud, not to friends, not even to themselves. Instead, it leaks through in little moments. The late-night story views. The anonymous profile checking your updates. The random likes on posts from 6 months ago. All of it is a silent scream. Do you still think about me? But you're not answering. And that silence, that void, it gets bigger. What used to be a shared space of connection has now become an emotional vacuum. And here's the brutal beauty of Stoicism. You're not feeding that vacuum. You're not giving them emotional oxygen. And that stillness? It chokes their ego. Why? Because your silence doesn't validate their importance. It doesn't give them closure. It forces them to deal with something they were never taught to handle: emotional accountability. That's what tears them up. Do you know what most people never expect after a breakup? That the one they left behind will actually thrive. Not just survive, but evolve. Because that's what you're doing in Stoic relationships. You're not sitting in silence because you're stuck. You're silent because you're moving with clarity, rebuilding your foundation. Your energy isn't just missing from their life, it's being invested in yours. And that contrast, it's what haunts them. They try to move on. They go on dates. They post the filtered highlights. But none of it hits the same. Because what's missing isn't activity, it's your presence. Your stability. Your grounding energy. They didn't just lose a person, they lost their emotional home. And the deeper they sink into distractions, the more obvious that loss becomes. People think they'll miss your smile, your texts, your voice. But what they really miss, what slowly eats at them, is how centered they felt when you were around. And now? It's gone. Replaced with noise. Shallow, empty noise. And the worst part? You're not showing signs of struggle. You're not breaking down for them to feel superior. You're not reacting for them to feel desired. You've become a ghost they can't pin down. And in today's world, being invisible to someone who once had your full attention is the most powerful statement you can make. That's Stoicism. That's true freedom. Not because you're playing games, but because you're finally playing by your own rules. So now the silence starts to do what words never could. It unsettles them. It makes them check for signs. It makes them reflect, maybe even regret. But that's not your goal. You're not here to hurt them. You're not here to get even. You're simply not here at all. You've left the stage, and they're stuck staring at a spotlight with no actor. No show. Just echo. An echo doesn't soothe, it stings. But here's the thing, don't expect them to say any of this. They won't. They'll wear pride like armor. They'll pretend they're better off. They'll say things like, I needed space, or, it wasn't working. But at night, when their distractions fade and they sit with their thoughts, they remember the version of you who showed up, who listened, who cared deeply and consistently. And then they realize, that version isn't available anymore. And that realization is what breaks them, not your absence, but the fact that your absence means something. It means you chose peace over chaos. It means you finally respected yourself more than the connection. It means you're done. This is where Stoic relationships redefine the ending. Because in Stoicism, we don't close chapters with noise. We close them with growth. And that growth? It creates a void they can't refill. Not because you were perfect, but because you were present. Emotionally available. Grounded. And that's a presence not easily replaced. Especially when they didn't realize its value until it was gone. So, while they sit in the wake of your stillness, trying to read silence like it's a text, you're somewhere else entirely. Not looking back. Not waiting. Not watching. You're building. You're becoming. You're reclaiming every ounce of energy you once gave away without boundaries. That's not cruelty. That's evolution. And it leaves them with a void they didn't expect, and no road back. 2. Emotional discipline destroys the game. You didn't explode. You didn't lash out. You didn't run to your phone and pour out a long message trying to explain yourself or fix things. And that's what shattered the narrative they'd rehearsed in their head. They expected emotion. They expected noise. But what they got? Silence, rooted in emotional discipline. And when someone's used to controlling the tempo of a relationship through your reactions, your calm becomes absolute chaos in their world. They can't measure your silence. They can't decode it. And the longer you stay composed, the more they unravel. You see, they had a blueprint. In that blueprint, you were supposed to fall apart, to chase, to try. But you didn't. You broke the cycle. And when someone expects to feed off your reaction and you give them nothing, their strategy falls apart. Here's the part they'll never say out loud. Emotional discipline is more powerful than any form of revenge. Because it's not about pretending not to care. It's about truly not needing their validation to feel whole. You're not performing anymore. You're observing. You're detaching not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And that kind of stillness? It's confrontational. Because it reflects everything they never mastered in themselves. They relied on the drama. On the highs and lows. On pushing and pulling until you cracked. But now, you don't crack. You stay centered. That unnerves them. You know what's fascinating? When someone loses control of the emotional rhythm, they panic. Not always visibly, but deeply. They start throwing little signals your way, just to see if you'll bite. A like. A random view. A passive comment through a mutual friend. But you don't respond. Not because you're being cold, but because you've chosen peace. And in Stoic relationships, peace isn't passive. It's power. They're trying to restart a game you've already left. And nothing frustrates the ego more than being ignored by the person it used to control. Let's break this down. Why does emotional discipline destroy the game? Because the game only works when you play. When you argue, beg, or chase, you're in it. You're validating their strategy. But when you refuse to react, you remove the entire playing field. There are no rules anymore because there's no game. That silence? It forces them to deal with themselves. To sit in the discomfort of being unchosen by someone they once took for granted. That's not cruelty. That's consequence. And here's what hits even harder. You're not waiting around. You're not checking in, hoping they'll reach out. You've recentered your energy back into your mission, your growth, your healing. That shift is what tears them apart. Because it doesn't look like heartbreak. It looks like purpose. And purpose, when it's no longer centered around them, becomes the clearest sign that they were never your destination, only a chapter in your journey. They don't know how to handle that. Ever notice how some people only care when you stop caring? That's what's happening here. The moment you stepped out of the emotional spiral, they started losing their grip. Not because you ghosted them, but because you mastered the one thing they couldn't: emotional self-control. That's stoicism in action. And it's uncomfortable for them because it changes the narrative. You're no longer the heartbroken one. You're not spiraling. You're not lost. You're grounded. And that contrast, that unexpected calm, forces them to look in the mirror. They start asking themselves things they never asked before. Did I underestimate him? Was I just feeding off his reactions? Why do I feel this uncomfortable now that he's silent? And even if they don't say it out loud, that discomfort is real. Because when you stop playing the emotional game, you stop being predictable. And when you're no longer predictable, you become powerful. This doesn't mean you're above pain. Let's be clear. Emotional discipline isn't the absence of emotion. It's the mastery of it. You're still healing, still processing, still learning. But you're doing it with composure, with intention. And that makes all the difference. Because instead of projecting your wounds onto them, you're tending to them quietly. That maturity? It separates you. And trust me, they feel the distance. They just can't bridge it anymore. What's beautiful about this path is that you begin to realize your value isn't in someone else choosing you. It's in you choosing yourself every day, even when it's hard. Even when it would be easier to send that message, to peek at their story, to see if they miss you. You don't. Not because you're indifferent to the past, but because you're committed to the future. That's what Stoic relationships are really about. Not pretending you're okay, but choosing to be okay on your own terms. And now they sit with the reality that you didn't chase. That you didn't need closure. That you didn't try to fix something broken beyond repair. That self-respect, it's like a mirror they can't look away from. Because it shows them everything they're not used to seeing. Accountability. Boundaries. Inner strength. And every time they test your resolve and find it intact, it drives them a little further into self-doubt. Not because you're punishing them, but because you're no longer available for their chaos. Remember this, when you stop reacting, you stop being manipulated. That's what Stoicism protects you from. The moment you reclaim your response, you reclaim your life. And that life? It starts to feel light again. Peaceful. Directed. You wake up not hoping they texted, but looking forward to what you're building. You stop checking your phone, and start checking in with yourself. You stop waiting for their approval, and start seeking your own. That shift? It's not just attractive, it's magnetic. And ironically, that magnetism begins to pull them in again. Not because they want to love you better, but because they can't stand not being the center of your world anymore. They confuse that loss of control with loss of importance. But by then, it's too late. Because your emotional discipline has taken you beyond their reach. You've grown into someone they didn't expect, and now, they have to sit in the stillness they created, watching from a distance as you thrive. So here's what I want you to take from this. Don't ever apologize for your calm. Don't feel guilty for your silence. Don't second-guess the strength it takes to walk away with dignity. That kind of growth isn't loud, it's legendary. And every time you choose stillness over chaos, discipline over reaction, peace over proving your point, you're reinforcing a truth they can't ignore. They didn't break you. They revealed you. And the version of you that emerged? That's the version they'll never forget. If this resonates with you, if you're living this discipline right now or you're starting to, hit that like button and drop a comment below saying, Number 1. And if you want to keep growing, keep mastering yourself, and keep building powerful Stoic relationships, make sure to subscribe. This journey is only just beginning. 3. Growth is the mirror they fear. There's something unspoken that happens when you begin to grow in silence. It isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. But it's visible, in the way you move, in the way you no longer react, in the way you carry yourself like you have nothing to prove anymore. That kind of growth, it hits different. Especially to the person who never expected you to evolve. Because now, every quiet step forward you take holds up a mirror to their choices. And in that reflection, they're not seeing strength, they're seeing what they lost. In Stoic relationships, growth isn't about revenge or showmanship. It's about becoming sharper, clearer, more aligned with your own purpose. You're not changing so they'll come back. You're changing so you never go back to the version of you that tolerated what you didn't deserve. And that transformation, it's impossible to ignore. Even for them. Even if they pretend not to care. People expect you to stay broken after they leave. They expect the breakup to define you. They expect you to fall apart and sit in that sadness like it's a home. But you You got quiet, you got focused, and you got better. You didn't do it to impress them. You did it to reclaim yourself. And now, everything about you is evolving. Your energy, your goals, your standards. You've stopped explaining your worth and started embodying it. And that embodiment, it's confronting. Because it makes them question whether they ever really knew you at all. That's the irony. They were so certain they had you figured out. That you were the nice guy who'd always be there. The one who bent to keep peace, who gave more than he got. The one who tolerated, waited, forgave too easily. But now, that man's gone. Not out of bitterness. Not out of spite. But because you've seen yourself clearly for the first time, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That realization birthed a new standard. One you don't compromise for anyone. And while they try to act like it doesn't faze them, they notice. They always notice. Maybe it's the weight you lost, the clarity in your eyes, or the ambition in your movement. Maybe it's the silence, the fact that you no longer orbit their world, no longer seek their presence, no longer treat their access like a privilege they can abuse. Whatever it is, they feel the shift. And that shift holds up a mirror to everything they dismissed, everything they underestimated. It's uncomfortable for them. Because your glow-up isn't just physical, it's psychological. It's spiritual. It's emotional. You're not just better looking, you're harder to reach. You're not just more confident, you're more discerning. You're not just evolving, you're escaping the gravitational pull of their ego. And ego hates that. It doesn't want you to grow. It wants you to stay small, predictable, needy. But when you step into your own power through stoicism, you become untouchable. Not because you hide from pain, but because you mastered it. They never prepared for that. They never imagined that their absence would be the very thing that triggered your evolution. That by walking away, they'd actually hand you the silence necessary to discover your strength. That realization, that they were the catalyst for a version of you they can't reach anymore, that's the quiet pain they sit with now. Not because you punished them, but because you outgrew them. Let's be honest, growth is uncomfortable for everyone involved. For you, it means facing your own patterns, setting new boundaries, cutting off access to people who once felt like home. For them, it means realizing that home no longer exists. You've redecorated your life. New priorities. New mindset. New mission. And they don't have the map anymore. And this is where it gets real. They don't just miss you, they miss who they were when they had your attention. Your presence validated them. Your consistency calmed them. Your energy grounded them. But now that you've removed it, they're left feeling the emptiness. Not because you were everything, but because your presence forced them to be better. And without that presence, they're left with themselves. That's the mirror they fear. Growth changes your entire vibe. You become less available, less emotionally accessible, less reactive. And that detachment? It's not cruelty. It's clarity. Because now you see things for what they really are, not through the lens of hope, but through the lens of experience. You've learned what it costs to keep someone around who doesn't value you. And you're no longer willing to pay that price. This is what Stoic Relationships build in you, a foundation so strong, you don't need to scream about it. You don't need to prove it. You just live it. And every day you wake up and make choices that align with your healing, you're rewriting your story. Not for them. For you. You're becoming someone your past self needed. And that evolution? It's inspiring to everyone who witnesses it, except the person who caused it. For them, it's a loss. A glaring reminder of what they let slip through their fingers. So they watch. Silently. Maybe from fake accounts. Maybe through mutuals. Maybe they say nothing, but they're paying attention. Because curiosity doesn't fade when someone levels up in a way you didn't predict. They start wondering, was I the reason he held back? Did I stop him from becoming this sooner? What would have happened if I had stayed? Those aren't questions they'll ever ask out loud. But they feel them. And those questions sting in a way no insult ever could. Here's the beauty of it all, you're not performing. You're not flexing. You're just moving differently. And that movement, That forward momentum makes you someone they can't read anymore. You've gone from transparent to mysterious, from emotionally accessible to reserved, from constantly explaining to silently executing. That silence? It's louder than any speech. It tells them everything they need to know, and nothing they want to hear. They can't reach you now. Not because you blocked them, but because you've emotionally elevated past the point where they can touch you. They're still in the loop of games, validation, and manipulation. You're operating from clarity, purpose, and principle. And that contrast? It's a chasm they can't cross. Not without doing their own work. And let's be honest, most won't. It's easier to scroll, to lurk, to wonder. But that wondering never leads to peace. It leads to regret. That's the quiet revenge of Stoic relationships. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just peace. You didn't try to win them back. You didn't try to make them see your worth. You became someone who no longer needed them to. And that self-sufficiency? It's intimidating. It breaks the dynamic of dependence. You're not the man they left. You're the man they fear they'll never meet again. And that fear? It lingers. It doesn't go away with time. Because the more you grow, the more distant their chances of catching up feel. You've moved ahead, not with spite, but with speed. Focused. Determined. Disciplined. And they're still stuck in the emotional echoes of who you used to be. But that version is gone. And in his place stands someone they no longer recognize, but deeply regret losing. That's the mirror. That's the growth. And that's why it tears them apart. Even if they'll never admit it. 4. The shift they can't control. Control. That's what it was really about all along. Not love. Not respect. Not mutual understanding. What they wanted, whether they admitted it or not, was control. Not the kind that screams orders, but the kind that manipulates through attention, silence, guilt, and emotional bait. The moment they sensed they had your heart, they began playing with the temperature. Hot, then cold. Available, then distant. Interested, then ambivalent. Why? Because unpredictability creates dependency. It's a pattern they've used before. Push you away, then pull you back. Keep you in orbit. Keep you guessing. Keep you invested. But something shifted. And that shift? They didn't see it coming. Because it wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. It was steady. It was stoic. And now, they're the ones spinning. You stopped responding the same way. You stopped chasing after confusion. You stopped over-explaining. You stopped rewarding mixed signals. And in that silence, in that emotional absence, you did something powerful. You ended the game. Not with a grand speech. Not with a final goodbye. But with your non-reaction. That's what makes it so devastating to them. Because you didn't ask for clarity, they were used to that. You didn't ask for closure, they prepared for that. You didn't try to fix what they broke. You just walked. Quietly. Without explanation. And that calm, it shattered everything they thought they had control over. Do you know how rare that is? Most people get emotionally tangled. They stay connected through resentment, hope, or even revenge. But you cut the cord. Not with hate, but with discipline. And when someone no longer has access to your emotions, they lose the one thing they used to feel powerful. That's why Stoic relationships work differently. You don't ghost people, you graduate from them. You don't burn bridges, you simply stop crossing them. You don't punish, you detach. And that shift creates a silence they can't interpret. They check your posts. They look for clues. They replay your last words. But none of it gives them what they want, an opening. An opportunity to step back in. But there isn't one. Because you've sealed the door, not with spite, but with peace. You've shown them the one kind of power they can't handle. The power of being unaffected. And that's what drives them crazy. They're no longer in control of the narrative. You are. By saying nothing, you've said everything. You're done. And they feel it. You see, control isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's dressed in kindness, in checking in just seeing how you're doing. But you now see through it. You recognize the bait. And that recognition is the shift. You no longer crave their attention. You no longer need their apology. You're not waiting for them to fix anything. You've moved on, not physically, but energetically. And that kind of departure? It leaves no room for manipulation. You're not playing hard to get. You're just no longer available. That's what they can't handle. They thought they could always reel you back in. They thought you'd always respond eventually. That you'd always be open to talking things through. But this time is different. You're not angry. You're indifferent. And indifference, to someone who craves control, is unbearable. Because it means they no longer matter the way they used to. And that reality, it's brutal. Now they're stuck. Not because they missed the relationship, but because they missed the role they played in your life. The emotional influence. The ability to trigger you. To make you feel things. But you've disconnected from all of it. And that disconnect? It changes the power dynamic entirely. They used to be the one deciding when things started or ended. Now you've reclaimed that power, not with force, but with stillness. You've become unreadable. And in Stoicism, being unreadable isn't about hiding your feelings. It's about not offering them up for manipulation. You observe, but you don't react. You notice, but you don't chase. You care, but you don't collapse. That quiet strength is what's destroying the illusion they once believed in. That you needed them more than they needed you. But now they're unsure. And that uncertainty is their undoing. They don't understand how you became so centered. How you went from deeply invested to emotionally independent. And that independence, it's not fake. It's not for show. It's real. You've spent time with yourself. You've built discipline. You've redefined your self-worth. You've learned the difference between attachment and connection. And most importantly, you've learned to walk away from anything that disturbs your peace. That's what Stoicism teaches. Not to suppress emotion, but to control your response to it. And once you master that, the entire game changes. You no longer respond to breadcrumbs. You don't argue over misunderstandings. You don't plead for someone to stay. You simply observe who values you, and you move accordingly. That movement is what destabilizes them. Because they don't know what's coming next. They can't manipulate someone they can't read. You've created a new standard. Not just for them, for everyone. Because now, anyone who enters your life has to rise to the level of clarity you've created. They have to bring peace, not chaos. Depth, not games. Intention, not confusion. And most people? They're not ready for that. Especially someone who once thrived on your emotional availability. They missed the version of you who bent. Who gave second chances. Who hoped beyond reason. But that version died in silence. And from that silence, you were reborn. So now, as they sit in the wake of that shift, they're realizing what it really meant. You weren't just being quiet. You were reclaiming your power. You were closing the gap between who you were and who you were meant to be. And in that growth, in that self-actualization, you became unreachable. Not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. That evolution? It's not something they can reverse. They can't unsee the new you. They can't pretend the dynamic didn't change. They can't fake control in a space where you've removed their access. That's what breaks them, not the silence, but what the silence represents. It represents that you're done. Fully, finally, and unapologetically done. And so now, they're left with the aftermath. Not of a dramatic breakup, but of a quiet transformation. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to fix it. They don't even know how to approach you anymore. Because you're not the same. And they can feel it. If this resonates with you, if you've felt that shift and know exactly what I'm talking about, take a second to like this video and comment. Number 1. To let others know you've stepped into that same power. And if you're ready to keep mastering your mind, building stoic relationships, and living from emotional strength, go ahead and subscribe now. This journey is yours, and we're just getting started. 5. Indifference is the new attraction. Attraction doesn't work the way most people think it does. It's not always about looks, charm, or words. Sometimes it's about silence, presence, energy. And the most magnetic shift you can ever make after a breakup isn't to become louder, flashier, or more desperate to prove your worth. It's to become indifferent. Not out of spite, not as a tactic, but because you've truly reached a place where their presence, or absence, no longer affects your trajectory. That kind of detachment doesn't push people away. Ironically, it draws them in. You see, when you were emotionally invested, always available, always trying to make things work, they had options. They had room to play games, to withdraw, to take without giving. You were accessible, predictable, emotionally visible. And in today's world, people rarely appreciate what they don't have to earn. But now, that's changed. You've shifted into something they didn't expect, indifference. And that shift, it shakes everything. They didn't believe you'd get to this point. Not really. They thought the connection was strong enough to hold you. That your attachment would outlast their behavior. That no matter how many times they confused you, disappointed you, or withdrew emotionally, you'd always come back. That you'd always try again. But you didn't. Instead of making noise, you made moves. Instead of explaining your boundaries, you enforced them. Instead of seeking closure, you created distance. And that new energy? It doesn't chase, it ascends. Here's the twist most people don't talk about. When you stop seeking someone's validation, your value increases in their eyes. Not because you're manipulating them, but because you're finally grounded in yourself. And grounded people are rare. They're stable, centered, untouchable. And for someone who once had emotional access to you, seeing you now detached, composed, and focused, it's disorienting. They can't place you anymore. Can't predict you. Can't control your emotional temperature. And that lack of access, that mystery, becomes an itch they can't scratch. They begin to watch more closely. Read into your silence. Obsess over your calm. They start to experience what you felt, the anxiety of uncertainty, the craving for answers, the confusion that grows in silence. Only now, it's on them. You've become the question mark in their mind. Not because you're playing games, but because you're too busy building to entertain their confusion. You're focused, creating, improving. Your absence isn't a punishment, it's a reflection of your new priorities. That's what makes it so attractive. Not just to them, but to everyone around you. Because energy doesn't lie. People can feel when you've stopped performing, when you've stopped needing, when you've started living. This is the real beauty of Stoicism. In Stoic relationships, attraction isn't about chasing, it's about clarity. You know what you bring. You know what you want. And you're not bending that truth to keep someone around. That self-possession radiates. It draws people in not through noise, but through presence. And now, instead of asking if they'll come back, you're asking a more powerful question. Do they even qualify to be in your space anymore? That question is a turning point. Because it shifts the power dynamic entirely. You're not reacting. You're selecting. You're observing. And most importantly, you're leading. Leading yourself. Leading your energy. Leading your life. That kind of leadership is rare. And the rarer it becomes, the more attractive it becomes. Especially to someone who used to take your presence for granted. They thought they had time. They thought they could drift in and out. But you ended the loop. You stopped waiting. You stopped wondering. And that stillness, that decision to remain silent in the face of emotional chaos, that's what creates the real pull. Because now they want answers. They want closure. They want to know how you detached so cleanly. But you're not explaining it. You're not justifying it. You're not even addressing it. You're just living. And that's what they never accounted for. That your healing wouldn't be loud. That your comeback wouldn't be announced. That your evolution wouldn't be shared in real time. They expected drama. What they got was distance. They expected confusion. What they got was clarity. And clarity, when it's no longer centered around them, feels like abandonment to someone who is used to being chased. That's why your indifference is tearing them apart. Not because you're cruel, but because they can no longer use your reactions to feel important. They don't know where they stand with you anymore. And in the absence of certainty, their mind starts spiraling, creating stories, imagining scenarios, wondering if you've moved on, if someone else now gets the version of you they once had. And that mental storm? It's fueled by one thing: your silence. You don't need to do anything extra. You don't need to prove anything. You're not trying to become attractive, you already are. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you've mastered your emotions. That's what Stoicism creates. A kind of grounded masculinity that doesn't flinch under pressure. That doesn't chase when it's ignored. That doesn't fold under guilt. And in that stillness, you become magnetic. Others start noticing too. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers. People are drawn to that kind of presence because it's so rare in a world full of noise. You're no longer loud. You're centered. And that calm confidence, it speaks louder than any performance ever could. They might not say it. They might not show it. But they feel it. And that feeling? It lingers. They may try to get your attention again. A DM. A comment. A passive post. But you're not biting. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned to care for yourself more. You've learned that access to your time and energy is not something you give to those who used to drain it. That standard, that inner shift, sets the tone for everything moving forward. It becomes the new filter. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Because now you see things clearly. You're no longer looking at them through the lens of longing. You're seeing them through the lens of growth. And through that lens, you understand something they don't. Attention doesn't mean value. Effort does. And anyone who wants to be in your life now has to bring more than presence. They have to bring consistency, integrity, depth. And if they can't, you won't chase. You'll let them go and keep walking. That's what Stoic relationships are really about. Not about being hard or closed off, but about being emotionally sovereign. You belong to yourself now. And because of that, you've become the kind of man who no longer seeks permission to move forward. You've stopped explaining your glow up. You've stopped apologizing for your boundaries. You've stopped offering your energy to people who never protected it. And so now, as you continue to grow, as you continue to elevate, your indifference becomes your greatest asset. Not because it keeps people out, but because it keeps you in control. You're not proving anything to anyone. You're not trying to win someone back. You're simply being. And in being, quiet, composed, focused, you've become exactly what they lost, and exactly what they'll crave from a distance. Even if they'll never admit it. 6. Pride masks the regret. They'll never say it. Not out loud. Not to you. Maybe not even to themselves. But the truth sits there, heavy, just beneath the surface. They regret it. The way they left. The way they treated you. The way they assumed you'd always be there. That regret, it's real. But it's wrapped in layers of pride. Because pride doesn't let people admit when they've lost something valuable. Pride pretends. It performs. It hides. And that's exactly what's happening now. On the outside, they look fine. Maybe even thriving. But underneath? There's a storm of unanswered questions, unresolved emotions, and an ache they can't quite name. You became the one they underestimated, until you became the one they couldn't forget. Regret doesn't always show up with tears or apologies. Sometimes it shows up in silence. In late-night views of your stories. In old photos they can't bring themselves to delete. In hesitation when someone asks about you. It shows up in the way they stalk your progress while pretending they've moved on. Because the truth is, they didn't expect this. They didn't expect you to grow. To glow. to evolve without them. They didn't expect your silence to say more than their explanations ever could. At first, they thought it was just space. That you needed time. That eventually you'd reach out. That eventually they could come back and things would be as they were. But nothing is as it was. Because you're not who you were. You've changed. And that change didn't come from a place of revenge. It came from healing. From self-respect. From realizing that you were always enough, even when they treated you like an option. And that realization, that awakening, it changed the entire equation. Now, they're watching a version of you they never imagined. Stronger. Sharper. More grounded. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're just living with clarity. And that clarity? It exposes everything they lost. It makes them reflect. Maybe not out loud, but in quiet moments, when the distractions fade and they're alone with their thoughts. That's when the truth creeps in. That's when the what-ifs begin to whisper. What if I hadn't pushed him away? What if I had valued him while I had him? What if that really was my person? But pride steps in. Pride tells them to stay quiet. To keep scrolling. To pretend. Because admitting regret would mean admitting they were wrong. That they misread your worth. That they walked away from someone who was building a future, not just a fantasy. And for people who live behind ego, that kind of self-awareness is painful. So they mask it. They mask it with forced laughter, with distractions, with performative happiness. But the mask doesn't silence the regret. It only hides it. And the irony? The more you stay silent, the more the mask cracks. Because your silence isn't passive. It's present. It's a reminder that you're no longer playing the role they assigned to you. You've outgrown the script. You've walked off the stage. And now they're performing alone, trying to recreate a scene that no longer exists. That's what regret feels like. Not just missing someone, but knowing you can't access them anymore. Not emotionally. Not mentally. Not spiritually. In Stoic relationships, that's the real power. You don't seek to make someone regret losing you. You become someone they can't reach, because you've stepped into your own power. You've become whole, not as a reaction to their absence, but as a result of your self-discovery. And that wholeness? It echoes. It travels. It makes its way into the places they thought they buried you. In conversations. In memories. In silent comparisons they'll never speak of. Pride tries to keep them above water. But the tide of your growth keeps rising. Every new success. Every post where you're thriving. Every moment where your peace is louder than their chaos. It chips away at their denial. Because deep down they know. They know they had something rare. Something real. And they let it slip through their fingers thinking they could return when the timing felt better. But now the door is closed. Not slammed in anger, but gently, quietly, firmly closed. That kind of closure? It hits harder than any argument. They may try to test the waters. Send a message. Like a post. Drop a subtle breadcrumb. But they won't say what they really feel. They won't admit they missed the way you made them feel safe. Seen. Supported. That's the paradox. They want access to the benefits of your presence without facing the truth of their choices. But you no longer entertain breadcrumbs. You don't revisit places where your peace was compromised. You've learned that access to your heart is not a right, it's a privilege. One that must be earned, not assumed. That's the essence of Stoicism. Not just control over your emotions, but discernment about where you place your energy. You're no longer available to people who made you feel disposable. You're no longer open to cycles that leave you depleted. You've built a boundary, not a wall of bitterness, but a perimeter of peace. And anyone who wants back it must face the truth of what they broke. But most won't. Not because they don't feel it, but because they can't bear to name it. Regret, for them, is a quiet companion. It walks beside them when they see someone who reminds them of you. It lingers when they hear your favorite song. It wakes them up in the middle of the night when their distractions have run dry. And they scroll, searching for a glimpse of you, hoping you haven't forgotten. But you have. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. You've made peace with what happened. You've accepted that not everyone gets to go where you're headed. And in that acceptance, you've become free. That freedom, it's what separates you. Because you're no longer reacting to the past. You're responding to your future. You're building, not begging. Moving forward, not looping backward. And that kind of evolution? It's unforgettable. They'll say you changed. That you became cold. Distant. But the truth is, you became clear. Clear about what you want. Who you are. What you deserve. And when clarity enters the room, confusion has to leave. That's what they're really mourning, not just you, but the access they once had to a version of you that no longer exists. That's the regret they'll carry. Quietly. Permanently. Because you didn't just leave. You evolved. You became someone who no longer seeks closure from those who gave you confusion. Someone who doesn't look back hoping to be remembered. Someone who has learned the most powerful truth of all. The only validation that matters is your own. And that shift? It's irreversible. So now, they live with the consequences of underestimating someone who was still growing. They were judging you from a snapshot, not realizing you were still in development. And now that the picture is becoming clear, it's too late to be part of the frame. That realization, that silent grief, it doesn't go away. Even if they'll never admit it. If this part of the journey speaks to your experience, if you felt that quiet regret on the other side of your growth, like this video and comment, number 1, so others know they're not alone in reclaiming their power. And if you're serious about building your strength, clarity, and presence through Stoic Relationships, go ahead and subscribe. We're not done yet. There's more wisdom ahead, and your journey deserves to be fully seen. This journey you've taken, from silence to strength, from heartbreak to rebirth, was never about revenge. It was never about proving anything to anyone. It was about reclaiming something you lost, yourself. Your dignity. Your emotional clarity. Your peace. That's what Stoicism offers, and why Stoic relationships aren't built on fireworks or outbursts. They're built on discipline, presence, and a deep understanding of what truly matters. You've felt every layer of this. The emptiness. The ache. The confusion. The moments where you wondered if staying silent made you weak. And then, the shift. The quiet power. The stillness that became strength. At some point, you realized that healing didn't mean you had to go back. It meant you had to go forward, alone, if necessary. That no one was coming to validate your pain. That the closure you wanted wasn't something they could give. It had to come from you. And so you let go. Not with a dramatic announcement, but with a deep, internal decision. I deserve more. More peace. More purpose. More self-respect. That was the moment everything began to change. That was when the old version of you, the one that over-explained, over-apologized, overstayed, began to fade. And in its place, a grounded, wiser, more powerful version emerged. This new you doesn't chase ghosts. You don't wait for someone who couldn't appreciate you when they had full access. You don't play the what-if game late at night, hoping they'll reach out with some magical realization. Because you know better now. You know that their silence speaks. That their indifference wasn't just a phase. It was a mirror, reflecting their inability to value what was real. And you? You were real. You gave your best. Your energy. Your consistency. Your loyalty. And they still chose confusion over clarity. That's not your failure. That's their limitation. So you moved differently. You started rising, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. You started building habits, routines, mindsets that aligned with your purpose. You became more focused, more disciplined. And somewhere along the way, you realized something powerful. You're no longer the person who needs to be chosen. You choose yourself. Every day. In every decision. In every boundary you enforce. And that kind of energy, it doesn't scream. It radiates. It pulls the right people in and keeps the wrong ones out. You've stopped trying to fit into spaces that require you to shrink. And maybe they've started noticing. Maybe they've been watching in silence, feeling that quiet regret build. But that's not your concern anymore. Their growth is not your responsibility. Your only responsibility now is staying aligned with your peace. And peace doesn't entertain confusion. It doesn't return to patterns. It doesn't beg for clarity. It simply exists. Rooted. Unshaken. And that's where you are now. You've reached a place most people never do. Not because they can't, but because they're afraid to walk away from the noise long enough to hear their own voice again. Your voice now isn't desperate. It's deliberate. You don't speak to be heard, you speak when necessary. You don't argue to prove a point, you walk away to protect your peace. That's the essence of Stoicism. Not the absence of emotion, but the control of it. And in that control, you've built a life that no longer revolves around someone else's presence. You are your own gravity now. Your own center. And that foundation? It's unshakable. They'll never admit how deeply your silence impacted them. They'll never confess how often they check for signs that you still care. They'll never say the words, "I regret letting you go." But you'll feel it. In the hesitation when your name comes up. In the subtle way they orbit your space. In the passive actions that reveal active longing. But by then, it won't matter. Because you'll be somewhere else entirely. Not just physically, but emotionally. You've transcended the pattern. There will always be people who only realize your value in hindsight. Who only understand what they lost after watching someone else admire it. But that realization belongs to them, not you. You don't need their apology. You don't need their validation. You've written your own closure with every decision to prioritize yourself. That's what makes you untouchable now. Not because you built walls, but because you built standards. Standards that protect your energy, your time, your future. You're no longer looking for someone to complete you. You're already whole. You're not looking for someone to rescue you. You've rescued yourself. And now, every step you take is aligned with that power. You move with intention, with purpose, and with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who they are. You've outgrown emotional games. You've evolved past the need for emotional breadcrumbs. You're creating your life, not reacting to theirs. This isn't just about a breakup. It's about a breakthrough. It's about transforming pain into power. About using solitude as fuel. About understanding that sometimes the most painful goodbyes lead to the most profound growth. And yes, it hurts. But growth often does. What doesn't serve you must be left behind. Not out of resentment, but out of reverence for what's coming. Because now, you're no longer chasing the past. You're preparing for the future. And your future? It's not built on who didn't stay. It's built on who you've become because they left. Stronger. Clearer. More self-aware. More in control. That's the beauty of Stoicism. It teaches you that suffering is part of the path, but it's not the destination. You feel it. You learn from it. And then you move through it. That movement? That's what separates you. That's why you're not stuck. That's why you're free. They'll keep pretending that they're fine, that they don't think about you, that your absence hasn't affected them. But silence has a way of echoing in the places they tried to bury you. And that echo? It doesn't fade. Not when you were the one who brought them peace, stability, depth. Not when you were the one who showed up with consistency in a world full of convenience. Not when your presence was the anchor in their chaos. Because no matter how loud the world gets, people never forget who made them feel safe. You made them feel seen. You held space. You gave more than you received. And while that wasn't sustainable, it was unforgettable. That's what they'll carry. Long after the distractions fade. Long after the noise dies down. They'll remember the one who didn't just walk away, but evolved in the process. Who became unshakable not in spite of the pain, but because of it. Who rose from heartbreak not with bitterness, but with dignity. This is your power now. And it's not fragile. It's not fleeting. It's not dependent on anyone else's acknowledgement. It's yours. Built in silence. Strengthened in solitude. Honed in discipline. And it will carry you far, far beyond the memories, the cycles, the doubt. It will carry you into a life where peace is your default, not your reward. Where relationships are rooted in mutual respect, not emotional leverage. Where love is a choice, not a currency for validation. You've arrived. And you're not looking back. That chapter is closed. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've learned. You've outgrown the version of yourself that settled. That overgave. That stayed too long. And now, you're writing a new story. One where you don't need to be chased to feel worthy. One where you don't need to be chosen to feel enough. You already are. And that is something they'll feel, long after they stop pretending they don't. This is what Stoicism looks like. This is what Stoic relationships demand. Not perfection, but presence. Not detachment, but discipline. And as you continue walking this path, never forget, your silence is sacred. Your evolution is real. And your power? It doesn't just shake them. It transforms you. Even if they'll never admit it.